Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and today we're looking to wrap up our first Emperor of Wu Let's Talk Lore series with episode 4, titled The Battle of Shiting. Now, we ended our last episode by discussing how as Cao Xiu initiated his march to rendezvous with Zhou Fang, the Wei side started to recognize that Zhou Fang's surrender was likely a trap. But despite repeated warnings from other generals and officials, and a soon-to-arrive edict to halt his march from Emperor Cao Rui himself, Cao Xiu decided to push on regardless, as he believed that his 100,000-strong force would be strong enough to overcome any Wu opposition. And as Cao Xiu continued his march along the foothills of Dabian mountain range, the Wu forces started to make plans for their ambush, as successfully luring Cao Xiu was only half of the battle. Now, in the beginning, the three generals in charge of the Wu forces failed to come to agreement of how to set the ambush against Cao Xiu, as Lu Xun, the chief commander, or Da Dudu, of this campaign, was in favor of combining all their forces, totaling 90,000 strong, together at the town of Shiting, just outside of the rendezvous point at Van, to surprise and defeat Cao Xiu's army. But Zhu Huan, who was the left inspector for this campaign, disagreed, as he argued that Cao Xiu earned his general post mainly through his family ties and not his experience, so the outcome of the fight will be no doubt in their favor. Therefore, there is no need to concentrate all their forces together for the initial ambush, as he wanted to take at least 10,000 of his own 30,000 force to the rear of Cao Xiu's army, as the narrow path between the towns of Jiashi and Guache formed a natural choke point that can be used to prevent Cao Xiu's inevitable retreat. In Zhu Huan's mind, if his forces could cut down trees to block Cao Xiu's escape path, then it might be possible to force Cao Xiu into surrendering. And then with the combined might of the Wu army and Cao Xiu's surrendered forces, then perhaps Wu can finally turn the script in the east to take key strongholds such as Hefei and Shouchun, or even be able to extend their wins towards Xuchang and Luoyang. Yet Lu Xun shut this plan down on the basis that it would be an unnecessary risk for the army. And angry at Lu Xun's decision and jealous of his meteoric rise following the victory at Yiling, Zhu Huan decided to bypass the chain of command as he went directly to Sun Quan to present his plans. However, instead of considering the plans himself, Sun Quan immediately wrote a letter to Lu Xun asking his opinion on the plan, as Zhu Huan overlooked the fact that Lu Xun's sudden rise to stardom within the Wu army was not only due to his success at the Battle of Yiling, but also mainly due to Sun Quan's trust in Lu Xun, as Sun Quan even married off his own niece, Sun Ce's only daughter, to Lu Xun. So it should come as no surprise that Lu Xun would shut down the plan once more, as he would argue that entrapping Cao Xiu's 100,000 strong army might not result in a surrender, as there was nothing more fearsome than the bite of a cornered dog, as most war manuals of the time advocated for leaving at least one path of escape, as the common conscript would never fight to the death as long as there was even a sliver of hope to survive. At the same time, with Cao Xiu's force outnumbering the Wu forces, Lu Xun was not as confident as Zhu Huan in their ability to win their first engagement, as if their initial ambush should fail, then the whole plan falls apart. At that point, Zhu Huan and his troops would turn from hunters into prey, as Cao Xiu's forces and the Wei reinforcements, such as Jia Kui's approaching army, would effectively trap Zhu Huan within the same narrow path between Jiashi and Guache that would no doubt become Zhu Huan's grave. Now, there's no way of knowing who was right here, as history does not do what-ifs, but this disagreement between Zhu Huan and Lu Xun is a good showcase of some of the clan rivalries that dominated Sun Quan's court, especially since Zhu Huan and Lu Xun both hailed from one of the 4 gentry clans of the Wu commandery. Now, what we do know historically is that Lu Xun's plan worked, as the combined might of the Wu army at Shiting would soundly defeat Cao Xiu in their first encounter, as at the time, Cao Xiu did make preparations for a potential Wu attack by splitting his own army up into thirds, so that he can place ambushes on his left and right flanks as he anticipated a frontal assault from the Wu forces. But what Cao Xiu could not foresee is that Lu Xun had anticipated these flank ambushes, as Zhu Huan and Quan Cong were instructed to attack from the left and right flanks, while Lu Xun would hold down the center to occupy Cao Xiu's main forces. And as these ambush parties were discovered by the charging Wu forces and thus losing their element of surprise, Cao Xiu's two flanks were beaten back as these retreating forces soon overwhelmed Cao Xiu's main camp. Then, with all three of Wu's armies pressing together in a unified attack, Cao Xiu was forced to retreat, as his now disorganized force had suffered too heavy of initial loss to mount any meaningful counterattacks, as over 10,000 men had been killed or captured alive in this initial exchange. And now forced to abandon their supplies, heavy machineries, and livestock, Cao Xiu's army eventually escaped to Jiashi, but the Wu forces were still relentless in their chase. But thankfully, at the last moment, Jia Kui's army would arrive at Jiashi after rapidly advancing for the last 2 days, with minimum rest, as Jia Kui had learned of Cao Xiu's predicament from captured local civilians. And spreading his banners along his march, Jia Kui was able to give off the appearance of a far more massive reinforcement army than the one he had with him, as intel of his arrival would halt the Wu forces as the cautious Lu Xun decided to take his wins and call off the chase. And with Jia Kui's men now garrisoned at Jiashi, Cao Xiu was able to regroup much of his shattered forces as Jia Kui graciously gave all his supplies to Cao Xiu, despite their personal dislike for each other. Now, while you might not think much of their personal grudge, but the relationship between these two was actually extremely hostile, as even after being rescued by Jia Kui, Cao Xiu decided to blame Jia Kui for not reinforcing fast enough, and try to use his position as the Grand General to order Jia Kui, who was the prefect of the Yu province at this time, to help pick up the banners that had been left behind by Cao Xiu's fleeing army. Jia Kui, who shared no love for Cao Xiu, openly defied Cao Xiu's orders as he told Cao Xiu that as the prefect of the Yu province, it was not his job to pick up after Cao Xiu. And now with the Wu forces pulled back, his job was done, as Jia Kui simply left with his army. Then after both of them had returned to the capital after the campaign had officially ended, both decided to sue each other to Emperor Cao Rui, blaming the other for mistakes during this campaign. Now thankfully, Cao Rui, despite his young age, was a rather crafty politician, as he would excuse both sides and awarded them for their roles in this unfortunate campaign. But for Cao Xiu, the failed campaign at Shiting would not only be an embarrassing defeat, but it would also be his last, as a back wound suffered by him during the retreat would act up 3 months later in November of 228, as he would become the first of the 4 co-regents of Cao Rui to die. Now for Sun Quan, the grand victory over Cao Xiu at the Battle of Shiting was the last piece he needed to crown himself emperor, as in the very next year, in 229, he would proclaim himself as the emperor of Wu in the city of Wuchang. And by June of 229, Shu Han would send over their diplomat in Chen Zhen to renew their alliances, now with both sides being kingdoms, as the new goal between this alliance is to split the 9 provinces held by the usurper kingdom of Wei evenly between the two sides. And by September 229, Sun Quan would officially move his capital to the city of Jianye, whose name stands for to establish a dynasty, as the kingdom of Wu would officially become the 3rd and final kingdom of the 3 kingdoms period. And with that, we're going to be ending our series here. And well, we will definitely return to Sun Quan in the future to discuss his many follies in these later years of his reign and continue our Hefei series as well, since the next 2 attacks will soon follow Sun Quan's coronation. But starting tomorrow, we're going to be shifting our attention to the kingdom of Shuhan and Zhuge Liang in particular. As with Cao Pi's death in 226, it would also herald in the start of the 5 northern expeditions by Zhuge Liang, which we'll discuss in full detail in a new series starting tomorrow. So hopefully you'll be looking forward to that, and hopefully you have enjoyed this episode and series enough to hit that like button to help support the channel. And I'll see you all next time. Bye!